Hey guys, tonight we drift into a story that feels equal parts eerie and cozy, like the moment you're tucked under the covers and someone starts whispering about things that probably shouldn't exist. You know the type. Shadows that move when they shouldn't. Lamps that flicker with no draft around. Or, better yet, creatures that claim dominion over the night. Tonight, that whisper carries us into Baghdad, a city of lamps and lanterns, where rumour flows quicker than the Tigris. They say a Djinn roams restlessly, a creature made of smokeless fire, powerful beyond measure. Yet this one, unlike his fierce brethren, holds a peculiar terror. He fears the sea, and let's be honest, if an immortal spirit that can bend steel and twist stone is afraid of something, you probably won't survive this either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and your local time. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The storm over Baghdad begins as you trudge along narrow, stone-paved streets, where the night air smells of cardamom tea and damp earth. You can hear the rain pattering against tiled rooftops, a sound that feels strangely modern, as if thunder has always been humanity's universal soundtrack. Lanterns sputter as wind snakes through alleyways, and shopkeepers slam their shutters, muttering about omens. Someone swears they saw a figure by the riverbank, tall and shifting, like smoke caught in a glass jar. Another insists the Tigris itself groaned, warning the city to beware. And you can't help laughing at how people always jump to conclusions. Lightning flashes, a stray dog howls, and suddenly it's, oh no, supernatural terror is among us. But you know what? Historians still argue whether fear itself might have been Baghdad's greatest export in the golden age of the Abbasids. Fear kept people in check just as much as swords and walls. In a tucked-away tea house, you slide inside to escape the rain. The owner eyes you suspiciously until you order a steaming clay cup of strong black tea. The room smells of mint, smoke, and nervous conversation. A group of men sit cross-legged, debating in hushed tones. One recounts how sailors who ventured into the Persian Gulf swore they saw a copper vessel bobbing against the waves. A fisherman tried to pry it open and nearly lost his mind at the sight of a giant hand made of flame clawing toward the sky. The detail is so outrageous you almost snort into your tea, but then the storyteller insists that the Djinn, mighty as he was, shrieked like a terrified child when a wave splashed against him. The rain grows heavier. You imagine the city as a quilt stitched with gold thread, each droplet of water sewing the streets into darker patterns. Baghdad in its prime was said to house over 1 million people. Yes, 1 million, which was mind-boggling in the 9th century. Compare that to most European cities of the same era, where maybe 20 or 30,000 souls squabbled over muddy lanes. Baghdad was a jewel, gleaming, bustling, layered with knowledge, and here you sit, in the middle of that brilliance, listening to rumours about a supernatural being who apparently can't handle bath time. One man at the corner mutters about Greek writings, how even the philosopher Pliny spoke of spirits that wouldn't cross water. Another waves his hand dismissively, insisting those were fairy tales carried on caravans, embellished by bored merchants. And honestly, that's half the fun. Every city needs its gossip fuel. It's like the medieval equivalent of doom scrolling. The storm rattles the shutters again, and you feel a shiver creep down your spine. You imagine the Djinn, pacing somewhere out in the rain, unable to go near the swollen Tigris, its waters pulling at him like a magnet he must resist. The very idea that fireborn creatures might have a natural enemy makes sense in a poetic way. What better balance to flame than water? Still, the thought lingers like the aftertaste of too strong tea. A boy runs into the tea house, breathless, saying he saw something near the river gates. The room falls silent. His words tumble out. A copper vessel, half buried in mud, glinting as lightning struck. The crowd mutters prayers, some laugh nervously, and one old man swears under his breath. The sea, they say, is no friend to spirits. Salt corrodes, brine purifies, and tides cannot be chained. You lean back, imagining the vessel, imagining a furious spirit caught inside, only to quake when a raindrop, just a raindrop, slips down the back of your neck. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. In ancient Egypt, people once used crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, really. If that isn't a reminder that humans have always tried weird ways to guard against nature, I don't know what is. So is it really that strange for Baghdad's residents to believe that a creature of fire might be undone by something as ordinary as seawater? The night stretches longer, you sip the last of your tea, and outside, the rain eases into a softer drizzle. The streets glisten, reflecting lantern light in golden pools. People scatter homeward, muttering their prayers. You step outside, pull your cloak tighter, and head toward the palace, where rumour has it Scheherazade herself is spinning this very tale for the king. And suddenly you realise you're not just listening to a rumour, you're walking straight into the heart of a story, one candle and one whisper at a time. You push open the palace gates, your sandals squeaking against the marble floor as rainwater drips in behind you. The storm outside dulls to a low rumble, as though even the thunder wants to hear what's happening within these walls. You know you shouldn't be here, slipping through the corridors where guards might notice your soaked cloak, but curiosity is a heavier chain than fear. Somewhere deep in the palace, a woman's voice lilts like silk unravelling, measured, deliberate, coaxing each syllable forward. It is Scheherazade, and she is telling her 1,001st story. The chamber glows with candlelight, dozens of flames swaying gently, their smoke trailing like dancers toward the ceiling. Cushions sprawl across the floor, jewelled fabrics glint under the light, and at the centre sits Shahryar, the king whose gaze once carried the weight of execution. Yet tonight his eyes soften, fixed entirely on the storyteller before him. Scheherazade, poised and calm, spins words like a loom, weaving strands of suspense and relief until even you forget how dangerous this game of survival truly is. She gestures lightly with a hand, as though conducting an invisible orchestra, and the candles seem to flicker in time with her tale. You slip into a shadowed corner, unseen. The guards do not notice you, or perhaps they too are enchanted. Scheherazade's story, you realise, has become more than entertainment. It's a spell over the entire palace. You lean forward, and her words coil into your ears. She speaks of a merchant, a voyage, and a copper vessel, and at the mention of the vessel, Shahryar leans closer. You find yourself doing the same. The reality of this scene is almost stranger than the fiction. Here's a king who once executed a new bride each morning, broken by betrayal, soothed only by nightly distraction. And here's Scheherazade, who volunteered herself into danger to save not just her own life, but those of countless others. Historians still argue whether she was a purely fictional invention or a folk memory of countless clever women who found ways to survive in patriarchal courts. But whatever the truth, you cannot deny her mastery. She holds a room with nothing but her voice, no sword, no army, just words. As she describes the restless sea, you can almost hear the crash of waves against hulls, smell the salt, feel the pitch of a ship under your feet. She paints it vividly, a merchant in silk robes, nervous about the weight of his cargo, sailors muttering as storms rise, the copper vessel tucked among spice sacks, unnoticed until it rattles on the deck. The king shifts on his cushions, and you realise you're shifting too, as though the ship might tilt beneath you. And then Scheherazade lowers her voice, barely more than a whisper. The chamber leans in, the vessel shudders, the lid strains, and smoke, black as pitch, seeps out. a shape begins to form, tall, immense, almost human but for the way its limbs swirl like clouds in a tempest. The Djinn unfurls itself with a roar, shaking the sails, and yet Scheherazade pauses here, letting silence hang like a noose. The Djinn freezes at the sight of the sea. A single wave slaps against the hull, and the spirit recoils as though struck by molten iron. The king frowns, intrigued. He strokes his beard and mutters something about the balance of the elements. You grin quietly to yourself. Leave it to rulers to always think in terms of cosmic balance. But Scheherazade's eyes gleam. She knows she has him hooked. Now, quirky tidbit break. Did you know medieval Baghdadi doctors sometimes prescribed ground pearls dissolved in vinegar as a medicine? People would literally drink liquid gemstones in the hope of curing ailments. Not exactly cheap healthcare, but it shows how much faith people placed in rare substances. And here, in Scheherazade's tale, the rarest substance of all is fear. Fear carried by a being who supposedly cannot be harmed by anything mortal. You let the warmth of the chamber sink into your skin. Candles drip wax like slow clocks, reminding you that dawn is creeping closer. Scheherazade does not falter. She knows the king's executioner waits each morning. Blade sharpened, her every word is a rope across a chasm, and yet she walks it with steady feet, never looking down. When she speaks of the merchant clutching the ship's rail, terrified of both the storm and the Djinn, you chuckle softly. Poor man. Imagine booking a sea voyage, worrying about pirates or spoiled dates in your cargo, and instead discovering you're sharing quarters with a supernatural roommate who hates salt water. The king chuckles too, though his laugh is heavier, weighed with curiosity. Why does he fear the sea? Shahryar asks, almost to himself. Scheherazade smiles, but does not answer. Instead, she folds the question into her story, promising it will be revealed only if the dawn does not arrive first. You realize then how masterful she is. She doesn't just tell stories, she sets traps of curiosity. Like a fisherman with nets, she casts them wide, then draws them tighter with each pause, and you, a shadow on the wall, are as caught as any king. Outside, thunder rolls one last time, then drifts away. The palace grows quieter, the candles lower, and Scheherazade's voice takes on that rhythm of sleep, the cadence that makes you wonder whether the Djinn is out there now, pacing by the river, terrified of every drop that falls from the sky. The night deepens, and Scheherazade's voice does not falter. She threads the merchant into the heart of the tale as if you were standing right beside him, boarding a vessel that creaks against the piers of Basra. You feel the sway beneath your feet, the briny sting of salt air filling your lungs, and the anxious chatter of sailors whose eyes dart constantly toward the horizon. The merchant, wrapped in layered robes of crimson and indigo, clutches his ledger like a lifeline. He's no seasoned traveller of the seas, his hands are ink-stained, not calloused by ropes. Yet here he is, setting sail with his fortune bound in jars of saffron, bolts of silk, and spices so fragrant they could fill an entire market square with their scent. The ship pushes off into the Gulf, sails fat with wind, and suddenly the city is nothing but a glimmering line behind you. The waves slap rhythmically against the hull. At first, it feels like adventure, the kind of voyage where songs are sung, dates are shared, and sailors boast of storms they have conquered. But beneath that chorus of optimism lies a low, uneasy hum. The merchant notices it when the youngest sailor, tasked with scrubbing the deck, pauses at a dull rattle coming from the cargo hold. At first, no one speaks of it. Superstition thrives at sea, and words have weight. But when the rattle continues, like metal knocking faintly against itself, the whispers begin. And of course, they're all about copper vessels. Every sailor has heard of them. Sealed containers where spirits were trapped long ago by magicians, tossed into the depths so they'd never trouble mankind again. Some even claim Alexander the Great himself had a hand in sealing such vessels, binding Djinn as casually as one might cork wine. Historians still argue whether these tales were pure invention or echoes of lost traditions, but sailors believe them with every fibre of their salt-soaked being. One night, the rattle grows louder. The merchant, curious despite his better judgment, sneaks below deck. The hold is thick with the smell of cardamom and damp wood. He pushes aside sacks of pepper and bolts of silk, and there it is, a copper vessel, squat and dented, sealed with a heavy cap that seems almost fused shut. Strange markings dance across its surface, spirals, stars, and words he cannot read. His first thought is profit. Copper is valuable, and oddities fetch high prices in Baghdad's markets. His second thought, however, is unease. Why does the vessel seem warm, almost pulsing with life? The next day, the crew discovers it. Panic ripples through the ship like a sudden gust of wind. Some demand it be cast overboard immediately. Others insist they mustn't touch it at all. The captain, weathered and stoic, decrees it will remain until they reach port, and so the voyage continues. But now each creak of the ship feels heavier, each wave sharper. The vessel is no longer cargo, it is a passenger, and not a welcome one. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Sailors in the medieval Islamic world often painted eyes on the prows of their ships. They believed the ship itself needed vision to navigate treacherous waters. Imagine boarding a boat and seeing it staring back at you, as if it too were a living thing. Perhaps this is why, when the copper vessel rattled, no one doubted that something alive was inside. As the days pass, the sea grows rough. Black clouds roll in, lightning forks across the sky, and the waves heave like mountains. The merchant clings to the mast, drenched and terrified, wondering if he's cursed. The copper vessel slides in the hold, thudding with every pitch of the ship, until, at last, the seal begins to crack. Smoke spills out, curling through the gaps like ink dissolving in water. You don't even need Scheherazada's voice to tell you what happens next. You can see it, smell it, feel it. A form rises, enormous and flickering, its head nearly brushing the deck beams. The sailors fall to their knees. The merchant stumbles backward, heart pounding. The Djinn has awakened, its voice booming like thunder layered upon thunder, and yet, in the very next breath, a wave crashes over the deck, spraying foam across the spirit's swirling body. The Djinn recoils with a scream so raw it nearly splits your ears. It's almost comical. Really, a being of fire and fury, undone by a splash of water. You half expect one of the sailors to shout, "Jay, quick, someone get a bucket!" But the terror is real. The Djinn withdraws, shrinking back toward the hold, trembling at the endless expanse of the sea around them. The merchant, shaking, realizes he is now bound to this secret. He cannot tell the crew what he saw, not unless he wants panic to swallow the voyage whole. And so, he sits silently on the deck, staring out at the endless horizon, knowing their journey is no longer about trade. It is about surviving whatever strange bargain exists between the sea and the fireborn spirit now trapped on their vessel. The copper vessel does not stay quiet. By the second night, the crew can hear it groaning below deck, a low metallic rumble that seems to sync with the roll of the waves. The merchant tries to keep his mind on ledgers and cargo, but the sound follows him everywhere, buzzing behind his ears like an itch he can't scratch. Finally, curiosity, always the ruin of sensible men, pulls him back into the hold. He kneels before the vessel, hands trembling as he brushes sand and salt from its engraved surface. The markings gleam faintly in the lamplight, like embers etched into metal. The cap is cracked open now, tilted just enough to release a steady hiss of dark smoke. It writhes upward like a serpent, coiling, testing the air, and then condensing into the outline of a hand. The merchant stumbles back, A voice follows, cavernous yet almost petulant. At last! The smoke surges, filling the hold, until it shapes into a figure, a towering djinn, shoulders pressed against the beams, eyes glowing like molten copper. Its very presence raises the temperature, and the merchant feels sweat bead on his forehead, even in the damp chill of the ship. "Free me," the djinn demands. "Break the seal, mortal, and I will reward you." The merchant shakes his head so violently you'd think he was trying to rattle it off. He's heard the stories. Spirits promise gold, power, kingdoms. But more often than not, you end up with a curse, a missing soul, or worse, a lifetime subscription to unsolicited hauntings. He stammers something about not having the strength, not knowing the words, not daring. The djinn leans forward, his voice dropping. "Do you know what it means to be trapped here between sea and sky? The magicians knew my weakness. They bound me where I cannot escape, for I may rage, I may burn, but I cannot touch the sea." And there it is again, that strange, absurd vulnerability. A creature of fire terrified of water. It makes poetic sense, sure, but also feels oddly human, like finding out Hercules had a peanut allergy. Above them, thunder rips across the sky, and the djinn flinches as rain pelts the deck overhead. You see it, yes, see it, the mighty spirit trembling like a wet cat. The merchant, against all logic, feels pity. Perhaps that is his greatest mistake. He reaches forward, fingers brushing the vessel's lid. For a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. Then, with a soft clink, the cap falls away entirely. Smoke gushes upward, filling every corner of the hold, wrapping around the merchant in choking waves. The djinn roars, stretching taller than the mast, bursting through the deck in a shower of splinters. Sailors scream, dropping ropes, some flinging themselves to their knees in desperate prayer. The captain curses, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands. The storm had been bad before, but now, with the djinn unfurling across the sky, it feels apocalyptic. Yet even as the spirit expands, its flame-bright gaze drifts to the sea, and the roar dies in its throat. A wave slaps across the deck. The djinn reels backward, writhing like a torch doused in oil. The sailors gape. The merchant realizes, too late, what this means. The spirit is free, but it cannot escape the ship. The ocean has become both prison and torment. Here's a historical aside for you. Medieval Arab sailors often recited protective verses before voyages. Not just prayers to Allah, but sometimes old charms and rhymes inherited from earlier traditions. Some even sprinkled salt water across the deck before setting sail, an extra layer of just in case. Salt, after all, has always been tied to purity and protection. You can imagine these sailors now, desperately wishing they'd salted the ship like a steak before departure. The djinn paces the deck, towering above the mast, but every time the sea surges he stumbles back, hissing like iron plunged into cold water. His fury rattles the sails, his voice shakes the rigging, yet he cannot flee. The merchant, half panicked, half awed, watches as the sailors scramble below, shouting that the ship is cursed. And in a way, they're right. A vessel is supposed to carry goods, men, dreams. But now it carries a paradox, a creature too vast for its planks, too afraid to leave them. The storm builds, waves crest higher, and the djinn howls not in power but in rage at his own helplessness. By dawn, the sea calms slightly, though the djinn remains, crouched miserably near the stern like a sulking giant. The merchant sits opposite him, utterly bewildered. He had expected death, riches, or both. Instead, he is sharing a ship with a prisoner who fears puddles, and somehow that's worse. Dawn drapes the horizon in pale gold, and the sea settles into an uneasy stillness. You can almost hear the ship creaking with relief, as though the timbers themselves survived a nightmare. The sailors move like men who age 10 years overnight, eyes hollow, movements jerky, prayers spilling from their lips in every language they know. But the real spectacle lies at the stern, where the Djinn hunches like a brooding gargoyle, smoke swirling in tight circles, glaring at the waves as though the ocean itself has insulted his lineage. The merchant edges closer, though not too close. You'd keep a safe distance too, unless you want to end your life as kindling. The Djinn's eyes, usually blazing like forges, flicker now with something less certain: fear. You see, the spirit growls, voice vibrating the deck. They bound me with a curse. The sea is not mine to command. One drop may not kill me, but the tide is poison to my kind. And so they laughed. Those old magicians, when they cast me into copper and flung me toward the depths, they knew I would thrash like a beast in a cage. The merchant swallows. He wants to ask why, to press for answers, but his tongue feels thick, his courage thin. So instead, he blurts the most practical thing a man drowning in terror can manage. Then, why not fly? Why stay here? The Djinn snarls, gesturing toward the horizon. The sea stretches farther than wings can carry. To rise above it is to risk its spray. To flee inland from here is to cross it still. The sea is a wall higher than mountains, wider than deserts. Even kings of flame bow before its salt. And there's your mainstream fact for tonight. Salt has always been more than seasoning. In the medieval world, it was wealth, a currency, even a weapon. Whole cities rose and fell over control of salt routes. Soldiers were sometimes paid in it, hence the phrase, worth your salt. It kept food from spoiling, purified wounds, and, apparently, freaked out supernatural fire beings. Who knew your kitchen shaker had such resume power? Back on the deck, the sailors debate. Some argue the Djinn should be chained again, stuffed back into the vessel before he grows bold. Others, terrified of angering him, insist they should toss him overboard, curse or no curse, and let the sea finish the job. The captain mutters prayers, staring at the horizon as though hoping Basra might suddenly materialize out of thin air. But the Djinn interrupts them all with a roar that rattles their bones. Touch me again, and you will burn to ash. Except, here comes the irony. He doesn't move an inch closer to the rail, doesn't even dare to glance at the white foam curling alongside the hull. It's like watching a lion that won't step past a chalk circle drawn on the ground. The sailors notice. The merchant notices. You notice. And for a moment, terror and comedy mix into something bizarrely comforting. If the monster's afraid of bathwater, maybe you have a fighting chance. The hours drag. The Djinn sulks. The crew mutters, and the merchant sits in the middle, feeling like the unlucky referee in a cosmic boxing match. Scheherazada's voice in the palace grows softer, slower now, as if she too is rocking with the rhythm of the ship. She describes the sea not just as water, but as a living presence, an old intelligence, vast and patient, that has bargained with fire since the dawn of time. The sea is eternal, she whispers, and all who fear eternity bow before it. You think about that for a moment, tucked in your imagined corner of the king's chamber. Fear of eternity is something even humans wrestle with. We build monuments, write books, post embarrassing videos online, all to avoid disappearing into the great, endless silence. So maybe the Djinn isn't so alien after all. Quirky tidbit time. Did you know that in some medieval texts, rivers were thought to hold spirits that could drag the unwary beneath? Children were told never to linger at riverbanks, not just because of accidents, but because water hands might pull them in. The Djinn's phobia then might not be so absurd. He's just another soul wary of drowning in something bigger than himself. By nightfall, the ship nears a cluster of islands. The captain announces they'll make landfall to repair storm damage and, perhaps, seek guidance from locals. The sailors cheer at the thought of solid ground. The merchant sighs in relief, and the Djinn, he rises, towering once again, his voice a growl that chills your spine. "Do not abandon me here," he warns. "The sea may bind me, but I am not powerless. Remember this. Merchant, your fate is tied to mine now. Where you go, I go. Where you die, I remain." Great. Just what you'd want on a vacation. A clingy supernatural roommate. As the stars glimmer above, the ship drifts toward the dark silhouette of land. You can smell it already. Damp earth, salt wind, smoke from unseen fires. But whether that island offers refuge or another trap, you cannot yet know. The ship groans as its hull grates against the shallows. The sailors cheer, not loudly, because no one wants to attract the Djinn's attention, but enough to let their relief tumble out in ragged breaths. After endless days of rolling waves and sleepless nights, land is salvation. You stand on deck, clutching the rail, watching the silhouette of the island sharpen under the pale wash of moonlight. Dark palms sway in the salt wind, and behind them, hills rise like hunched shoulders, cloaked in shadows. Smoke curls faintly from somewhere inland. Someone lives here. The Djinn, crouched miserably by the stern, growls at the sight of shore. His smoky form shifts nervously, as though he expects the tide itself to conspire against him. He mutters to himself, low and furious, words you can't understand, but that sound suspiciously like someone cursing out their landlord. When the first sailor lowers a dinghy into the water, the Djinn actually recoils, as though the lapping surf is teeth. "Go!" he rumbles. "Scurry onto your sand. But remember, my eyes are upon you." You don't need telling twice. The dinghy bumps against the beach, and you step onto the island. The sand clings like damp flour, soft yet gritty. Palms rattle in the breeze, and the air tastes sharper here, tinged with minerals. The merchant joins you, still pale, clutching his ledger as if numbers can protect him. A few sailors fan out with torches, their flames bending in the salty wind. The island feels alive, listening. You tread carefully up a path worn by feet, past driftwood altars where shells, dried fish, and strange charms hang. The torches like carvings on stones, spirals, wave crests, and shapes that look suspiciously like shackled figures. One sailor mutters a prayer, another insists the islanders worship the sea. Neither explanation feels reassuring. At last you reach a small fishing village, huts clustered close together, roofs patched with palm leaves, dogs bark, children scatter, and the fishermen step forward, skin weathered like old rope, eyes sharp with suspicion. When they notice your torches and see the merchant's robes, their expressions flicker. Fear, recognition, then resignation. They already know why you're here. An elder shuffles forward, his hair white as foam, leaning on a driftwood staff crusted with salt. "You carry it," he says flatly, his gaze fixed not on you but back toward the ship. His voice carries the weariness of someone who's repeated the same line for generations. "You have brought the cursed fire to our shore." The merchant stammers denials, insisting it was an accident, that they never meant to, but the elder only shakes his head. He gestures toward the waves. They chained it once, long ago, a vessel of copper, bound with salt and words older than empires. It was not meant to sail again. The villagers murmur, some spit on the ground, others cross themselves in gestures not unlike sailors' protective charms. They whisper of nights when the sea glowed red, when fish boiled to the surface, when storms rose without warning. Always, they say. It was the same spirit, fire imprisoned by brine. And here's your mainstream history nugget. Salt islands like this weren't rare. Many coastal communities in the medieval Gulf depended on salt harvesting, scraping crystallized layers from shallow pans to preserve food and trade inland. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was survival. It's fitting, then, that these fishermen see it as both shield and weapon against the supernatural. One young fisherman steps closer, bold despite the tension. He tells you of a ritual, nets soaked in brine, cast across shallow reefs, meant not to catch fish but to snag whatever wandered too close from the spirit world. You blink, picturing some poor fisherman dragging in a thrashing fire being tangled like a very angry tuna. Historians still argue whether such rituals were symbolic or sincerely believed, but in this village, there's no debate. They're deadly serious. The elder lays down a choice: return the Djinn to his vessel, seal it with salt, and cast it back into the sea, or doom both yourselves and the island. The sailors argue in low voices, some nodding, others too terrified to approach the Djinn again. The merchant sweats through his robes. You just feel the creeping certainty that you're in one of those moments where every option is terrible. The villagers, though wary, offer food, bowls of rice steamed with fish, bread baked in clay ovens, and cups of sour palm wine that tastes faintly like seawater. You eat, grateful for something solid in your stomach, but every bite carries the tang of fear, as if the island itself is watching you chew. And of course, quirky tidbit time, medieval sailors often believed islands could vanish and reappear, like mirages. Maps from the age are littered with phantom islands that cartographers swore existed, but no one could ever relocate. Maybe this place is one of them, appearing only when the sea wants to remind mortals of its bargains. Night deepens. The waves hiss louder. Somewhere back on the beach, the Djinn roars, frustrated, his voice echoing through the palms. The villagers glance at one another with grim resignation. They've heard it before. You wrap your cloak tighter, realizing you may have stepped not into sanctuary but into the waiting jaws of a much older story. Sleep on the island comes in uneasy fragments. You curl up under a palm leaf roof, the mat scratchy against your skin, and dream of waves climbing the walls, sloshing around your ears while a smoky figure cackles just out of sight. When dawn finally smears itself across the horizon in pale pinks and gold, you're almost relieved to rise, even if your joints feel like they've been trampled by a camel parade. Outside, the village is already buzzing. Fishermen mend nets with long bone needles, women pound grain into coarse flour, and children chase each other barefoot through sand that glitters with salt crystals. The Djinn, however, lurks at the edge of the beach, glaring at the surf as if it's mocking him. His form shifts and ripples with the morning light, smoke curling into shapes that dissolve before you can quite make them out. He looks miserable, like a cat forced to bathe. The elder gathers everyone near the tide line. His voice, though cracked with age, carries the weight of ritual. He retells the old legend, a Djinn born of fire trapped by mariners long ago using copper, salt, and the whisper of forgotten gods. He points toward the waves. It is bound to the sea, not by chains you can see, but by memory itself. Every tide that rises remembers. The villagers nod solemnly, as if this explanation is as normal as discussing the price of sardines. You stand there, blinking, wondering how to process the idea that the ocean keeps receipts. But hey, history is full of cultures treating the sea as alive. Did you know? The ancient Greeks had over 50 sea deities, from Nereus, the old man of the sea, to Thalassa, a goddess whose very name just means sea. Makes sense. If you rely on waves for survival, you give them a personality, preferably one that doesn't hold grudges. The Djinn growls during the retelling, insisting none of it is true. He claims he was betrayed, tricked into imprisonment by jealous rivals, forced to spend centuries in darkness. His voice is harsh, but behind the bravado, you hear fear, a child's panic at the sight of deep water. "I will not go back," he snarls, smoky fists curling. "Bet the world burn, then I sink again." The elder doesn't flinch. He raises a bowl of seawater, sprinkles it into the sand, and chants words that make the Djinn recoil like he's just smelled spoiled milk. For a heartbeat, The air hums with tension. You half expect lightning to split the sky. But the elder lowers the bowl calmly. "See," he says, "even your fire bends to brine." Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval sailors swore by pouring seawater through sieves to predict storms. If the foam clung in certain patterns, they claimed tempests were brewing. Historians still argue whether this was proto-meteorology or just superstition dressed up as science. But either way, you can imagine these villagers peering into froth like fortune-tellers, deciding whether to sail or stay home. The villagers reveal another layer of the legend. The Djinn's prison wasn't just physical, it was guarded by words. They speak of bindings of language, stories told and retold until they themselves became chains. You realise, with a shiver, that by listening, by repeating, you may already be tightening those chains or loosening them. No pressure, right? Just your bedtime story, shaping cosmic contracts. As you walk through the village later, a young woman shows you a shard of copper washed ashore years ago. Its surface is etched with curling script, faded but still sharp enough to sting your finger. The merchant inspects it greedily, muttering about value while the villagers hiss at him to show respect. The copper hums faintly, and for a moment, you think you hear a distant rush of waves trapped inside it. The sailors grow restless. Some demand to leave, fearing the villagers' rituals more than the Djinn himself. Others argue they should try the ceiling, that it's their only hope of reaching home. The Djinn, overhearing, laughs bitterly. "You cannot chain me twice," he says. "Try, and you'll drown with me." And because bedtime needs at least one laugh, a sailor sneezes, scattering a pouch of salt he'd been clutching like a protective talisman. The grains spill everywhere, and the villagers gasp, half in horror, half in exasperation. Salt, they explain, should never be wasted. It's wealth, shield, and blessing rolled into one. You just nod awkwardly, as if you didn't put way too much on your fries last week. By dusk, a decision forms like a storm cloud. The elder insists the ritual must begin tonight, before the tide turns. The Djinn, pacing like a caged beast, senses it too. Smoke coils off him more thickly, and every torch sputters when he passes. The villagers light more fires, not to chase him away, but to remind the sea that they're ready. You lie awake, hearing the waves breathe in and out, wondering which will come first, freedom, doom, or some messy blend of both. The night thickens, heavy and slow, like honey poured over the island. The villagers gather on the beach with torches thrust into the sand, their flames trembling in the salt wind. You stand with them, shoulder to shoulder with sailors who try to look braver than they feel. The Djinn looms nearby, his form a restless mass of smoke and embers, glaring at the sea as if daring it to blink first. The elder raises both arms, and the chanting begins. The words are old, older than any language you recognize, a rolling rhythm that seems to sync with the surf. The sea answers with a hush, as though even the waves are listening. Villagers sprinkle salt in concentric circles on the sand, enclosing a wide space. Within that space, they place copper fragments, relics of the Djinn's first prison, polished until they gleam faintly under the moon. You step back as the Djinn is urged toward the circle. He snarls, refusing, smoke snapping like whips. The sailors hesitate, but the merchant of all people takes a step forward. His hands tremble, yet his voice rings out. "If you will not enter willingly, you'll doom us all." The Djinn lunges at him, fiery eyes blazing, but the salt crackles where he tries to pass. For a moment, he falters, trapped by an invisible line. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval Islamic scholars often describe Djinn as beings of smokeless fire, invisible yet capable of taking form. Accounts differ wildly, but many agreed salt, iron, or sacred words could limit their movements. Whether symbolic or literal, Those protections gave sailors and villagers a fragile sense of control over forces they couldn't explain. The villagers chant louder, stamping feet in rhythm with the surf. The Djinn roars, but the sound seems muffled, swallowed by the salt circle. He writhes like smoke in a jar, his shape collapsing, reforming, then collapsing again. You feel the hair on your arms rise, as if the very air has turned electric. Someone nearby whispers. He fears drowning more than death itself. The words chill you deeper than the night breeze. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Some folklorists argue that the idea of Djinn fearing water isn't just myth, but a clever inversion. Fire cannot survive in water, true, but in arid lands where water was sacred, linking it to protection against spirits gave people an extra reason to treasure every drop. Historians still argue whether such beliefs spread from practical logic or were stitched into tales purely for drama. Either way, standing here, you'd happily vote for the drama theory. The elder begins sprinkling seawater from a copper bowl, moving around the circle. Each drop hisses where it falls, though no fire burns there. The Djinn recoils, pressed tighter toward the centre, his smoky limbs folding inward. The sailors watch, wide-eyed, as though they're witnessing both salvation and blasphemy. But then something goes wrong. A gust tears through the beach, scattering part of the salt circle. In the gap, the Djinn surges forward, a plume of fire and shadow breaking free. Villagers scream, scrambling back. The torches flicker wildly, some extinguished. For a terrifying moment, the entire sky seems to fill with smoke. The Djinn doesn't strike, though. Instead, he howls toward the sea. "You will not take me." His voice echoes over the waves, louder than the surf, carrying rage and terror in equal measure. You see the water rise in strange shapes, almost like hands, before slapping back down with a hiss. In the chaos, one boy rushes forward, clutching a net soaked in brine. He flings it toward the Djinn, and miraculously it catches. The Djinn thrashes, bound not by rope but by belief, each knot weighted with salt and prayer. Villagers swarm to help, pulling the net tighter. It's messy, desperate. Far from the elegant ritual they imagined, but it works. For now. And here's your comic relief, because you deserve it. One sailor, panicked, tries to help by flinging his dinner, half a salted fish, at the Djinn. It smacks the smoky mass with a wet slap, sticking for a heartbeat before sliding off. The Djinn roars in indignation, not pain, while the villagers glare at the sailor as if he's just wasted a sacred relic. You bite back a laugh, because hey, stress makes people creative. The Djinn collapses under the net's weight, smoke pooling low to the sand. The elder, voice shaking but steady, commands the copper shards to be brought forward. They're arranged in a circle around the writhing form, ready to be sealed again. The sea hisses louder, waves smashing against the shore as though urging them to finish. You realize, standing there, that you are witnessing not just myth, but survival, the way communities stitch story into shield, ritual into weapon. And though historians still argue whether such rituals were ever truly believed or just symbolic, the fear in everyone's eyes leaves no doubt. In this moment, it is real. The elder raises the final shard, etched with script, and places it down. The chanting reaches its peak, rattling in your ribs like a second heartbeat. The Djinn shudders, half-formed, then lets out one last roar, equal parts fury and despair, as the salt circle closes. The beach falls silent except for the sea, breathing in and out, patient as ever. Morning comes grey and raw, the sea swollen with leftover anger. You wake on the beach among villagers and sailors sprawled like driftwood, exhaustion painted on every face. The salt circle remains intact, copper shards glinting weakly in the dawn. Inside it, the Djinn crouches like a smouldering coal, bound but restless. His smoky form flickers, sometimes sharp, sometimes just a trembling haze. like he can't decide whether to stay visible or dissolve. The elder limps forward, staff pressing deep into the sand. His voice is gravelly, but strong. It holds, for now, but you cannot keep fire forever. Salt fades, copper breaks, words are forgotten. If you wish to live, he must be carried away again. The villagers murmur agreement, faces tight with dread. They've done this before, you realize. Maybe not this exact Djinn, but echoes of him, bound and reborn with every tide. The sailors grumble, muttering about risk. They want to be gone, to sail before storms rise. The merchant, however, insists on profit, always profit. He eyes the shards like a miser in a treasury. Copper of this purity could fetch. He cuts off as the elder glares at him, a look that could pickle fish on the spot. You smirk despite yourself. Even legends need comic relief, and greedy merchants are apparently timeless. Now, time for a mainstream fact. Copper really was a prize material in ancient maritime trade. Archaeologists have found evidence of large shipments ferried across the Mediterranean and Arabian seas. Durable, workable, and valuable. It was the stuff of both tools and currency. No wonder this island has been stockpiling broken vessels like holy relics. The villagers begin preparing for a second sealing, this time permanent. Nets are soaked again, salt poured into clay jars, and shards scrubbed until they gleam. The elder insists it must be done before nightfall, when the sea is strongest. Darkness feeds him, he warns. We must return him to the silence beneath. The Djinn hisses at the preparations, eyes blazing. You fools, he spits. The sea does not want me, it fears me. That is why it tries to chain me. I am not your enemy. I am your weapon. His words hang, tempting. Some sailors glance at one another uneasily. Imagine having a fiery stormbringer on your side during raids or battles. The idea of power is seductive, and he knows it. You wonder, not for the first time, if he's lying. Historians still argue whether Djinn stories were cautionary tales, warnings against greed, or veiled justifications for power grabs. Was the fire spirit always evil, or just inconvenient to human plans? The line blurs like smoke in wind. By midday, tension builds like pressure in a kettle. Villagers argue with sailors. Sailors argue with each other, and the Djinn laughs through it all. You will never agree. Humans cannot bind themselves, let alone me. The elder tries to calm the chaos, but even he looks tired, shoulders slumping under centuries of repeating the same story. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some island traditions describe spirits being fed with offerings of fish, rice, or even tobacco smoke, not out of reverence, but to pacify them, like bribing your cranky neighbour so they don't complain to the landlord. You imagine tossing the Djinn a salted fish and saying, "Chill, buddy, we're just trying to survive." It probably wouldn't work, but hey, can't hurt to brainstorm. As the sun dips, the ritual begins again. This time, the villagers work faster, chanting louder, their rhythm urgent. The sailors, perhaps shamed, help lay copper shards in the sand. You, caught between fear and fascination, sprinkle salt with shaking hands. The Djinn thrashes, his smoke whipping into shapes, faces, beasts, storms, each dissolving as quickly as they form. He's weakening, but not defeated. Suddenly, a sailor breaks ranks. He kicks aside part of the salt circle, shouting, "Why serve the sea when we could rule it?" He rushes at the Djinn with a blade drawn, but the smoke swallows him whole. When it clears, nothing remains, just his dagger, glowing faintly red, as if it had been forged inside a furnace. Everyone recoils. The Djinn laughs, though the sound wavers, almost desperate. "See, I give power. Only cowards turn away." The elder trembles but continues, voice shaking yet firm. He pours seawater onto the sand, sealing the gap the sailor made. The circle reforms, glowing faintly in the dusk. The Djinn's laughter dies down, replaced by a low growl, his eyes dim like embers sinking into ash. And here comes your little laugh line, one boy watching all this whispers. Can we just throw him into a really big bucket? His mother hushes him. But you grin, because honestly, not the worst idea, practical, if not elegant. The ritual nears completion. The Djinn collapses again, smoky body folding inward like a campfire smothered by rain. The villagers chant until their throats are raw, voices scraping the night. When the final shard is set, silence slams down. The sea exhales, the torches flick steady, and the Djinn is gone. Nothing left but smoke stains on the sand. But as you look out to the waves, rolling calm under the moon, you can't shake the sense that the sea hasn't finished speaking. The villagers scatter to their homes, voices hushed as if loud words might tempt the smoke back into form. The sailors retreat toward their ship, pale and shaken, muttering oaths that sound more like apologies to the sea than promises to each other. You stay by the shore, toes buried in damp sand, listening to the water's slow inhale and exhale. The beach smells of copper and salt, sharp enough to sting your nose. The elder lowers himself onto a driftwood log, shoulders heavy. He looks smaller now, like the ritual drained not just the Djinn, but him too. It is done, he says, though the way his eyes flick to the horizon betrays doubt. But remember, nothing is ever truly gone. Fire leaves embers, even under the sea. His words ripple through you, not comforting at all. Behind you, the merchant paces furiously, still obsessed with the shards. If these people can summon such forces, he mutters, imagine what they hide inland. He speaks of treasure, trade, alliances, but never of safety. It's like watching someone insist they can negotiate with a thunderstorm. You almost laugh, except you know how storms answer. Here's your mainstream historical fact to ground things. Medieval maritime traders often treated islands as pit stops, places to gather supplies and barter with locals. But they also recorded endless stories of islands that tested men, where strange rites, taboos, or spirits demanded obedience. Some of those islands even made it onto official maps, marked with warnings like, "Here dwell monsters," or "Here be fire." The line between travelogue and myth was thinner than a hair. The sailors, jittery, debate whether to stay another night. Some swear the sea is calmer already, urging to sail while fortune favours them. Others point to the still smoking sand and argue they'll be cursed if they leave before dawn. Historians still argue whether medieval crews truly believed in curses or just used them as scapegoats when things went wrong. Either way, it's effective. You can feel the crew tearing itself apart over invisible dangers. The villagers prepare a quiet feast, more solemn than celebratory. Bowls of fish stew, rice steamed in leaves, and flatbread sprinkled with, of course, salt. You sit cross-legged, eating by torchlight. The food is hearty, filling, but every bite feels like borrowed time. Around you, children peek nervously at the shoreline, mothers hush them, and elders hum protective lullabies. You wonder if this cycle of fear and ritual has shaped the island for centuries. Then comes your quirky tidbit. Some coastal communities believed you could ward off spirits by inverting everyday objects, like turning bowls upside down or crossing oars on the sand. The logic? Confuse the spirits with a world turned backward. You glance at a boy idly flipping shells the wrong way round, and you can't help but smile. Primitive or not. It's clever. Basically the medieval equivalent of saying, reboot reality and hope the glitch disappears. The Djinn, though gone from the circle, lingers in presence. Every gust of wind carries a faint tang of smoke. The sea itself seems restless. Waves tumbling closer than before, frothing around the copper shards half buried in the sand. You step closer, curiosity outweighing caution. For a split second, you swear you hear a whisper, your name, dragged across the tide. You flinch back, heart hammering. No one else reacts. Maybe it's just your nerves. Maybe. Comic relief sneaks in with one sailor who decides to test whether the Djinn is really gone. He tiptoes up to the circle, pokes at a shard with a stick, and immediately yelps when it sparks faintly. He drops the stick, dances backward, and swears he's fine. Though everyone else is laughing so hard, their exhaustion cracks for the first time all night. Even the elder cracks a smile, muttering something like, "Fools live longest, for they think least." But beneath the laughter, unease coils tight. If the Djinn can be bound, can he also be unbound? Was tonight's ritual victory, or just another delay in an endless tug of war? You glance out at the dark water, where the moon carves a silver path across the waves. The sea glimmers, beautiful but sharp, like the smile of something that knows it always wins in the end. When you finally lie down to rest again, the sand still warm beneath you, you hear the ocean whispering, not in words, but in a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. It lulls you close to sleep, yet every time your eyes droop, you jolt awake. Certain something is moving just beneath the waves. Whether it's only the tide or the Djinn waiting for his chance, you can't decide. Either way, the night feels like a balance beam, and you're teetering on the edge. Dawn spreads in streaks of rose and gold, painting the sea as if it had done nothing sinister the night before. The villagers rise early, carrying baskets to the shore, their movements brisk but subdued. The copper shards remain where they were set, half buried in damp sand. Smoke no longer curls from them, but you swear the air feels warmer when you step too close, like the heat from a banked fire. The sailors, bleary-eyed, argue over breakfast. Some want to set sail immediately, claiming the sea looks forgiving enough. Others refuse to board until they're certain the Djinn is truly gone. The merchant, unsurprisingly, insists on exploring inland. He speaks of riches, timber, spices, perhaps more of those etched copper vessels. Think of the markets, he urges, as though dangling coin could erase the night's terror. You sigh, realizing greed always has the loudest voice. The elder intervenes, gathering everyone around. His staff digs into the sand as he warns. You think the binding is finished. It is not. The sea remembers. The sea waits. If you carry him back onto the waves, you invite his fury again. The sailors groan, some openly accusing the villagers of inventing endless rituals just to keep them stranded. Tension sizzles hotter than the sun overhead. Now for your mainstream fact, medieval seafaring was plagued by disputes exactly like this. Merchants wanted profit, sailors wanted safety, and locals wanted outsiders gone before curses or diseases followed. Written records show ships abandoning cargo or whole crews after quarrels about unseen dangers. Fear wasn't just superstition, it dictated trade routes and survival. The merchant grows bolder, suggesting the Djinn be controlled rather than sealed. He insists that with the right vessel and script, they could wield him, turning storms to their advantage. Some sailors perk up at the idea, visions of easy victories flickering in their eyes. The elder slams his staff, silencing them. You cannot wield the tide, he says. You can only drown in it. His words hang like stones dropped into deep water. Quirky tidbit time. In some Arabian folk tales, Djinn were said to ride whirlwinds. Sailors, spotting sudden waterspouts, sometimes shouted insults to scare them off, or tossed scraps of bread into the air as bribes. Picture a hardened sailor yelling, "Go haunt someone else," while flinging dinner rolls into a cyclone. A bit ridiculous. But when the sea looks like it wants to chew you alive, ridiculous becomes practical. Back on the beach, children gather around you, whispering their version of the tale. They say the Djinn once lit fires under the sea, boiling fish until they floated belly up. They giggle at the image, though their eyes dart nervously toward the waves. For them, fear is play, woven into games of chase and mimicry. You smile weakly, wishing you had their courage or their short memories. As the day wears on, the sailors prepare the ship anyway, hauling supplies, patching sails, and tightening ropes. The Djinn may be gone, but the shadow of his threat still drives them to move. The villagers watch, grim and silent, making no effort to help. You sense a line drawn in the sand, outsiders against the island, neither trusting the other. But the sea itself doesn't stay silent. By afternoon, the horizon darkens, clouds piling like mountains. Thunder rolls faintly, far away, yet approaching. The sailors exchange uneasy glances. Coincidence, one mutters. Another spits and whispers, "He's calling the storm." Historians still argue whether weather coincidences cemented these legends, but honestly, when lightning flickers exactly as someone mutters "Djinn," it's hard not to connect dots. Comic relief arrives from one sailor who, in a panic, starts tying garlic cloves to the ship's mast. The villagers stare, baffled, until someone explains it's supposed to ward off evil. The elder just shakes his head. "Wrong spirit," he mutters. You stifle a laugh, though part of you wonders if a garlic-scented mast might at least keep vampires away. 2 problems solved in one, right? As evening falls, the decision is made. The ship will leave at dawn, storm or no storm. The villagers plead one last time. Don't take the Djinn back to sea, but the sailors are deaf to it now. They crave escape more than wisdom. You pack your meagre belongings, heart heavy, because you know the story isn't over. The sea never forgets, and the Djinn, whether trapped or free, isn't finished with you yet. That night, lying on the sand for what might be the last time, you listen to waves gnawing at the shore. They sound hungrier than before, pulling harder, as though they want to drag the whole island down with them. The stars glitter overhead, cold and distant, while the horizon flickers with lightning. You close your eyes, wishing the next chapter of this cursed voyage would simply dissolve into dream. The morning breaks under a bruised sky, streaked with violet clouds that seem far too low, as though the heavens themselves are leaning closer to watch. The ship waits at anchor, patched sails stiff against the wind. You and the others shuffle toward it reluctantly, as though each step pushes you closer to a fate already written. The villagers do not come to see you off. They remain inland, fires unlit, doorways shuttered. The beach is empty except for the hiss of waves clawing at the shore. The sailors murmur prayers under their breath as they climb aboard. Some trace charms into the wood with their fingernails, little symbols half remembered from childhood. The merchant, however, strides up the gangplank with his chest out, feigning confidence. He carries a copper box tucked beneath one arm, etched with fresh inscriptions he swears will keep the Djinn contained. "This time," he declares, "the spirit is ours to command." The crew's silence is heavy. The elder's voice echoes in your mind. You cannot wield the tide, you can only drown in it. His warning is as steady as the creak of the deck beneath your feet. You clutch the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the storm still looms, waiting. The sails unfurl with a snap, catching the wind. The ship lurches forward, leaving behind the cursed beach. For a brief moment, you allow yourself to breathe easier. Perhaps the elder was wrong. Perhaps the Djinn's fire has finally been extinguished. But then, as the shoreline shrinks, you hear it, a low groan, like a furnace igniting deep beneath the boards. The copper box trembles in the merchant's hands. He presses it tighter against his chest, muttering the binding script under his breath. A faint heat radiates from the vessel, enough to make the sailors step back. He is restless, the merchant admits, though he still tries to sound proud. The crew isn't fooled. They eye the box as if it might leap open at any moment and devour them all. Time for your grounded historical detail. Many medieval ships carried charms and containers thought to hold dangerous spirits or protect against them. Some were simple carvings of saints, others bottles with sealed wax, filled with seawater or sand. Chroniclers note that sailors sometimes treated these objects as volatile cargo, keeping them far from the cooking fire or lanterns, lest the contents burst free. In a way, the copper box feels like just another of those talismans, except it pulses with something alive. By noon, the sea grows choppier, whitecaps slashing across the waves. Rain spits intermittently, as though the clouds are testing their strength. The sailors shout to one another, working the rigging with frantic energy. But you notice something unnerving. The storm always seems closer than the last time you looked, no matter how fast the ship cuts through the water, as if it is not weather at all, but a predator following your wake. Quirky tidbit. In some Islamic folklore, Djinn feared salt water because it represented purification and boundaries they could not cross. This belief was so widespread that mothers sprinkled salt around cradles at night, creating little moats to keep spirits at bay. Imagine a tiny fortress made of nothing but kitchen spice. It's a charming thought, yet here, with an ocean of salt stretching in all directions, the spirit doesn't seem cowed. Instead, it seethes, rattling its prison with increasing fury. By dusk, the storm is no longer distant. Lightning forks directly above, followed by thunder that rattles your bones. Rain lashes in sheets, and the ship groans as though it might split apart. Sailors scream orders, ropes snap, and canvas flaps like the wings of a dying bird. Amid the chaos, the copper box slips from the merchant's arms. He dives, grasping for it, but the vessel slides across the slick deck, clanging against the mast. The heat intensifies. Steam hisses where the rain strikes the box, as though the fire within is burning hotter than the sea's cold assault. One sailor cries out, "Throw it overboard!" Another counters, "No! The curse will follow!" The crew splinters, some lunging for the box, others retreating. The storm howls louder, as if mocking their indecision. And you? You freeze, torn between dread and duty. If the box remains, the Djinn might burst free. If it is cast into the ocean, who knows what horrors will follow? You glance at the merchant, his face twisted between greed and terror. His lips move soundlessly, no longer commanding, only pleading. The ship tilts violently, waves smashing against the hull. Barrels break free, rolling across the deck. The copper box slides again, this time toward the railing. Lightning illuminates everything in stark white. The fear in every face. The churning black sea waiting below, and the faint outline of smoke leaking from the seams of the vessel. And then, just as the box teeters at the edge, you hear it, not with your ears, but inside your chest. A voice, deep and resonant, whispering, "Do not let me fall. The sea is my prison, and yours as well." Your hands grip the railing so tightly they ache. The choice is no longer distant. The storm demands it, and the Djinn begs it. All that remains is your decision, though dawn, if it ever comes, may reveal it was never truly yours to make. The storm's fury does not ease, but Scheherazada's voice slips through it like a thread of silver, weaving calm from chaos. You picture her in the royal chamber, eyes half lit by candle flame, hands folded demurely in her lap, even as her words coil like smoke around the king's restless mind. Shahryar leans forward on his cushions, a man who has commanded armies and ordered executions, now spellbound as a child at the hearth. The copper box hovers on the brink in your imagination, rolling with the pitch of the ship. The Djinn's voice echoes, "Do not let me fall." You feel your palms sweat, as though you too are about to drop it, though in truth you are sitting far away in Baghdad. Just another listener at the edge of Scheherazada's tale. That is her trick. She makes you forget where you are. She lowers her tone now, slowing the rhythm, and the king follows, breathing deeper, lulled despite himself. But she is careful, too calm, and he will slip into sleep before the suspense snags him. So she lets the tension linger like a blade held above the skin. Historical aside, in many medieval courts, storytellers and poets wielded more influence than generals, because words could bend mood and temper more effectively than swords. The caliphs of Baghdad were known to keep entire libraries of tales memorized by their court reciters. Some even believed that a well-timed story could prevent civil unrest, soothing the populace better than any edict. In a sense, Scheherazade is practicing statecraft with every syllable. She leans closer to Shahryar, her shadow stretching long against the embroidered wall hangings. And just as the storm threatened to claim the ship, she whispers, the Djinn spoke, not in thunder, but in a voice that crept into the sailor's heart, binding him tighter than chains. The king's fingers twitch, restless. He wants more. Then she pauses, an audacious silence, the sort of silence that makes the listener's throat tighten. She lets the candle crackle, lets the king's pulse quicken. The merchant's fate dangles unseen, the copper vessel still poised at the ship's edge in your mind, and Scheherazade, clever beyond measure, folds her hands neatly and says nothing at all. The king blinks, confused, then angry. Why do you stop? He demands. His voice reverberates against the chamber walls, but Scheherazade lowers her gaze, meek yet steady. My lord, the night wanes. The story is long, and dawn approaches. A fringe tidbit here. In some versions of the tales, it's said Scheherazade deliberately broke her stories at moments of maximum tension, not only to preserve her life, but to manipulate the king's sleep patterns. By keeping him restless and curious, she denied him the satisfaction of finality. It's a kind of psychological warfare, hidden beneath silks and lullabies. Shahryar growls, torn between fury and fascination. He knows if he orders her execution now, the story dies unfinished, and so, once again, he spares her. He lies back on his cushions, eyes wide open, seeing ships tossed in storm and hearing whispers from copper prisons. Scheherazade's soft breath is the only steady sound. She glances at the guttering candle. One more night secured, but at what cost to the king's mind? Already, you sense his thoughts are no longer entirely his own. Scheherazade has seeded them with fire and sea, with voices that will not quiet. Historians still argue whether Scheherazade was ever real, or whether she was a composite, an archetype of the cunning woman who survives through wit rather than weapon. What is certain is this. Her imagined presence shaped centuries of storytelling, teaching that suspense, humour, and empathy could be sharper than steel. And so the storm at sea remains unresolved, the copper vessel neither rescued nor lost. Shahryar's jaw tightens as his eyes close, but even in the first shadows of sleep, you know he is not resting. He is pacing that ship's deck in his mind, lightning flashing above, listening to the same whisper you heard, "Do not let me fall." Scheherazade smooths the folds of her robe, watches him drift, and smiles the faintest, slyest smile. She knows the game is hers to play, and for another night she has won. The king sleeps, but it is not the gentle slumber of a man at peace. His breath comes shallow, his brow furrows, and his hands clench as if grasping for something unseen. In the flicker of the last candle, you can almost picture the visions that stalk him. The Black Sea raging, the copper vessel rolling across slick boards, and a voice that refuses to be silenced. His restless dreams are not Scheherazade's fault exactly, though she planted the seed with exquisite care, watering it with just enough dread to ensure it would take root. You follow him now into those dreams, as if you've been smuggled into the royal bedchamber, hitching a ride on the tide of his imagination. The storm is there, alive and furious, waves like walls and lightning like daggers. The king staggers across the deck of that phantom ship, robes clinging to him in sodden folds. He calls out for his guards, but no one answers. His kingdom is gone, his power swallowed by the roar of the ocean. Historical fact to ground you: medieval physicians often warned rulers against eating too heavily before bed, believing rich foods caused night phantoms, the unsettling dreams that could weaken judgment. It is not hard to imagine Shahryar's table, heaped with lamb stews and honeyed cakes, setting the stage for such visions. Dreams, in those days, were thought of not as random firings of the brain, but as messages, omens sent by God or by something darker. In his dream, the king sees the copper box crack open, just slightly, and steam escapes in whirls of red and black. A face begins to form in the smoke, shifting, never fully human. It leans toward him and whispers the same line you've heard before: "Do not let me fall." Only this time, the words drip with accusation, as if the king himself is responsible for holding the vessel steady. A quirky tidbit: ancient sailors sometimes slept with ropes coiled around their wrists, believing the knots would tether their souls to their bodies so they wouldn't drift away during dreams. You almost wish Shahryar had such a rope now. Instead, he is swept along, untethered, deeper into nightmare. The dreamscape shifts. The palace walls dissolve into waterlogged ruins. Fish glide where pillars once stood, and jewelled mosaics glimmer faintly beneath silt. The king wanders this drowned city, calling for Scheherazade, but only the echo answers him. He sees carved arches and toppled thrones, corroded by salt. Somewhere in the distance, bells toll, not the soft chimes of prayer, but the hollow clang of metal striking water. Historians still argue whether the drowned cities mentioned in tales like these were inspired by real ruins seen after floods, or whether they were entirely products of the imagination, exaggerated by travelling merchants. Either way, the imagery sticks: cities devoured by the ocean, preserved only in nightmare. The king stumbles through the drowned streets until he comes upon the copper box again, sitting neatly on a coral throne. He reaches for it, driven by something between fear and fascination. As he lifts it, he feels the weight of flame inside, heavy as stone, yet hot as a forge. Suddenly, his reflection appears in the polished metal, but it is not his own face, it is the Djinn's. The spirit grins, showing teeth like jagged coral. The king gasps in his sleep, rolling on his cushions, startling a dozing servant who dares not wake him. You, however, watch him twitch, hear him murmur in half-formed words, as though bargaining with an enemy only he can see. He whispers, "I will not let you fall," and then groans, clutching his chest. Scheherazade stirs at the far edge of the chamber, feigning sleep herself, though her eyes are wide open. She knows the dreams are gripping him. She knows her story has sunk hooks into his mind. And still, she lies still, patient as the tide, waiting for dawn. Back in the king's dream, the storm redoubles. The sky collapses in a sheet of water. The drowned city crumbles, and the copper vessel slips from his hands. He dives, clawing through the water, bubbles streaming from his lips, but the box falls faster, down into a trench so black it seems bottomless, and just before it vanishes, the Djinn's voice rumbles once more, low and final. "If I drown, so will you." The king jerks awake, sweat dripping down his temples, eyes wild. The candle is out, only the faintest grey light of dawn creeps through the carved lattice of the windows. He sits upright, chest heaving, but no one dares ask what he dreamed. Only Scheherazade knows, though she will not speak of it until the next night, for now the silence is heavier than any storm. The night has thinned to its final threads. The chamber is hushed, the faintest grey washing across the lattice windows as the sun crouches just beneath the horizon. Shahryar sits upright on his cushions, eyes red-rimmed from his fractured sleep. The dream still clings to him like seawater in his beard, every blink returning him to the storm, to the copper vessel slipping through his fingers. Scheherazade stirs, stretching delicately as though waking from her own slumber, though you know she has been awake the whole time. Her gaze flicks toward the king, gauging, measuring. She knows the spell has worked. She has stitched fear and fascination into his marrow, binding him more securely than any chain. He clears his throat, rough and uncertain. The vessel, did it fall, he mutters, half to himself, but Scheherazade only tilts her head, feigning innocence. My lord, you must wait until tonight. Dawn has come, and stories cannot outpace the sun. The king scowls, but his shoulders sag. He knows the rules of this cruel game, even as he despises them. She has survived another night, and you feel the same tug of frustration, the same hunger for resolution. The Djinn's fate hangs unresolved, its voice still echoing in your own chest. Do not let me fall. Historical fact. Grounding the moment. Throughout the Islamic Golden Age, Baghdad scholars wrote entire treatises on dreams, debating whether they were divine messages, psychological echoes, or merely the stomach grumbling after too much lamb stew. Some insisted dreams could reshape reality itself if interpreted correctly. Imagine that. Entire kingdoms swayed not by armies, but by the vision of a king at dawn. The king rises, pacing the chamber, his slippers whisper across the carpets. Scheherazade watches with hooded eyes, letting silence do the work of 1,000 words. He looks back once, as if about to order her death, then turns away. Not today. Not when the storm in his mind still rages unfinished. A quirky tidbit to soften the edge. Sailors of the Red Sea once told stories that dolphins were guardians sent by God to keep Djinn from dragging ships under. Whenever a pod appeared, men clapped and cheered, convinced the sea was shifting back to mercy. You almost wish a dolphin would swim through Shahryar's restless head right now, chasing away the smoke and thunder, but no such luck. Scheherazade folds her hands in her lap, demure as always, but there is a gleam of triumph in her eyes. Another candle guttering low, another dawn survived. She has turned the sea itself into her ally, a tide that drags the king farther from his rage and closer to her mercy. Historians still argue whether the tale of the Djinn who feared the sea was ever truly part of the early Alf Layla wa Layla, or if it was woven later by storytellers adding their own salt and spice to the broth. But does it matter? The king is caught in it now, and so are you. The candle sputters one last time, then dies, leaving only daylight. The chamber feels emptier for it, as though the story itself has retreated to wait for nightfall. The king exhales, shoulders slumping, and at last, finally, he drifts into a lighter, truer sleep. And you? You feel the same easing, the storm in your mind giving way to calmer seas. The Djinn remains trapped, or perhaps free, depending on how you choose to dream it. But for now, the horizon is quiet. The waves lap gently against the hull of your imagination. So let the pacing soften. Let the words stretch into longer, gentler lines, like ripples spreading across a still pond. You have wandered through chambers and storms, through copper vessels and drowned cities, through Scheherazade's silken voice and Shahryar's restless sleep. And now the journey draws to its close, not with a crash of thunder, but with the hush of morning. Breathe slower. Let your eyelids feel heavier with each passing second. The sea you once feared has grown calm, the waves no longer clawing but caressing the shore in steady rhythm. Imagine yourself floating on that water, safe and untouchable, the salt keeping you buoyant, the horizon endless yet kind. The Djinn's whisper fades now, softer, smaller, until it is nothing more than the faint hum of background air, The storm has passed. What lingers is only the gentle sway of the tide, rocking you toward rest. Let the final image settle, a candle guttering low, a chamber wrapped in dawn, and you, drifting in that in-between place where stories become dreams and dreams become sleep. Allow yourself to sink, not like a vessel to the depths, but like a feather settling to earth. Good night, and may the sea carry you not into fear, but into the quietest, safest slumber.